What is Zack Snyder directing style? Directing is like the managing of an idea, right? So if you have an idea, you have to manage the actors and the photography and stuff. I have a pretty casual style with my people I work with because I just tend to like human beings and I want them to be happy. So I don't torture them too much. That's kind of how I do it.
I do love this part.
Hold on.
I don't want no trouble.
We're not here to bring any.
Are you ready?
So, is Zack Snyder actually a good director? Now, I've made it a point on this channel not to discuss or dissect films too much, especially not review or go in talk about actors or go into anything too specific. Because I'm in the industry, I feel it'd be really unfair of me to talk about specific films in too much detail, unless it's an older film or review a film. But Zack Snyder is a very special case because he polarizes so many different people. And being a filmmaker myself, I think the last thing I would want to do is not have any impact at all. So him being a polarizing director is not actually a bad thing. That means he's actually making an impact. The worst thing you want to do is make a lot of films or any films and nobody knows who you are. For example, does anyone know who John Watts is? Now, if you've heard the name, put that in the comments.
Hi, I'm Zack Snyder.
Zack Snyder. Everyone knows Zack Snyder. Patrick H. Williams has a wonderful video where he breaks down the career of Zack Snyder. I'm not going to do that. A bit like the two Jobs films. We had Steve Jobs, we had Jobs. I'm going to take the better approach and dissect just an element of Zack Snyder's career. And specifically, I'm going to go into maybe two of his films that best example exactly what is good and what is bad about Zack Snyder. I think what I really want to do is definitively answer the question, is Zack Snyder a good director? If you don't know who I am Marcus Flemmings. I'm a writer, director, and producer of feature films. I've now produced, written, and directed 6 feature films, and I've also written and produced another feature film. I think 3 of them are coming out next year. But that's completely irrelevant, isn't it? Because we're talking about Zack Snyder. The best way I can really analyze just how good Zack Snyder is by doing the following. What are his strengths and what are his weaknesses? Now, Zack Snyder started out in commercials. He really plied his trade making a number of commercials, including the Michael Jordan commercial in the 90s. His first gig as a feature film director was a very criminally underrated Dawn of the Dead.
Night of the living dead has ended. Dawn of the dead is here.
Nope, not that one. This one. The film itself was a moderate commercial success. Critically, however, it done great things. It also propelled Zack Snyder into a wonderful place to move his career forward. People started recognizing who he was. People started going, who is this director? For the most part, the director's typical greased up bodies, slow-mo shots, and at times kind of irrelevant slowing down of action was not really present in Dawn of the Dead. He was probably not in a position to do that. This was his first feature film, and the studios probably had an iron grip on everything he did. You could tell there was a talent in there just waiting to break out, but it wasn't quite evident yet. 3 years later, the year 2007, the film 300 hits the cinemas. This film was an absolute shot in the arm for film goers across the world. We'd seen things like The Matrix, we'd seen things like Sin City, where they used blue screen and 3D backgrounds to create wonderful environments, and The Matrix, where they slowed down footage to create incredible action sequences. But in 300, we saw a completely brand new way of shooting action. If we're going to get a clear and definitive answer as to whether Zack Snyder is a good or bad director, this film is the definitive film to analyze, because this is where all the little trademarks of Zack Snyder's work come into play. They were born here and they have stayed there ever since. And quite frankly, his style has not changed since this film. Now, when I say not changed, that may come across as a bit of a positive or a negative. I'm going to put a very clear underline under that and say I don't believe his style has developed since the film 300. Neither has his overall oeuvre of filmmaking. Now, when I first saw 300 at the cinema, I was blown away. I was on a date, so I was kind of busy doing what people do on dates in the cinema, but this film kept taking my attention. It kept taking my attention away from my lovely date and taking my eyes to the screen. I could not look away. The slow-mo shots, the visual references, the color scheme, the oddball characters, the greased-up chests, almost campy narrative, the almost campy acting, and of course, Gerard Butler's accent.
Now that's a bit of a problem.
I mean, wow, he's not even trying here, is he? We also see one of the early screen performances of Michael Fassbender here as well. Now, I think as the years have gone on, this film has been vilified for its perception of the Persians, and the way it kind of frames everyone who's evil as of dark skin, and the Persians as having black soldiers, and there's a lot of things going on here which I don't think Zack Snyder was thinking about at the time, that have over the years not aged very well. So let's take that off the table for a second, because it's not really what we're talking about today. Now, one of the first things that really struck me about this film was the use of slow-mo. I had never seen slow-mo used in such a way before. Obviously, slow motion's been around since the dawn of film, in one way or the other. But this was a different way of using slow-mo. It slowed down the action to the point where it was more visible, and at times, in the future, to the detriment of the director's work. But in this film, he perfectly sped up and slowed down the footage when it was needed. One of the things that has always been leveled at Zack Snyder is his style over substance. And it's a point that I personally have to also kind of double down on with him. I think this film is definitely a case of style over substance. Now, the substance, thankfully, is by Frank Miller, who's a wonderful comic book author and has created amazing projects over the years. But relevantly, as I mentioned it before, he also created Sin City, which is a very similar type of style of filming. The actual comic book of 300 is really solid, very simple plot, very simple structure, of which Zack Snyder does at times try to overcomplicate, but for the most part, he sticks to the comic and gets things really watertight. And this is the point that I want to talk about further on in the video, but I feel that the text here was absolutely crucial in creating such a tight piece of work. Now, I always remembered 300 as being maybe 90 minutes to 70 minutes. I'm very greatly mistaken. It's over 2 hours long. Now, another great thing about this film is the casting. This was not only one of the earlier films of Michael Fassbender, but it also kind of launched the career of Gerard Butler. It also is one of the biggest films that Lena Headey's been in as well. If you don't know her, she's of Game of Thrones fame. She plays Cersei Lannister and is absolutely incredible in that. This film as well, she's a very powerful character. Much like most Zack Snyder films, where he really portrays women as very powerful. So unlike Christopher Nolan, who gets a lot of flack for his lack of diverse casting in terms of races and in terms of his use of female characters, Zack Snyder's kind of the opposite on that front. Now, for me, on a personal level, and looking at this film kind of objectively, this is by far Zack Snyder's best work. And again, it's his second feature film. It's a campy slice of absolute genius. Now, I could sit here and go through the rest of his filmography, breaking down every single film, looking at different shots, so forth and so forth. However, as I mentioned before, 300 is kind of where he developed his style and kind of where he stayed in terms of his technicals. So there's no point in me going through every single one of his films. The real difference for me between each Zack Snyder project is the text, the script. And I did mention before, it's a very solid piece of text that he had to work from. So really the difference between the films is the text and how Zack Snyder chooses to approach them. Sucker Punch is the perfect example of where Zack Snyder can go wrong. This is an idea and a script written by himself, and you can tell this is complete style over substance. Screenwriting is not Zack Snyder's best asset. I would take it as far as saying storytelling isn't really Zack Snyder's best asset as well. Now again, in this film, the visuals are outstanding. They're lavish, they're in your face. The invention is supreme. The execution is not so much. Now, if we go all through his filmography, the problem is always the same, the screenplays, and how he chooses to interpret those screenplays on screen. From Batman vs. Superman to The Army of the Dead, I find myself thinking, incredible action, wonderful visuals, brilliant casting, poor story. And one of the reasons why Batman vs. Superman is such a slog to get through, for me anyway, is because over the course of 152 minutes, which is a very long running time, there are just a few action sequences, and they are done fantastically. The fight scene with Batman, for me, is the best Batman fight scene we have seen on celluloid. Now, I don't think it was shot on celluloid. I think it was shot on digital, but hey, it doesn't matter. You get the point. Again, the casting here is brilliant. Gal Gadot is an inspired choice as Wonder Woman, as she went on to prove with her own film. Ben Affleck is a wonderful Batman. For me, Christian Bale is still the best Batman. That may be because the films are the best Batman films, but nevertheless, Ben Affleck here is absolutely wonderful, and he's a really good Bruce Wayne as well. Doesn't get much to do as Bruce Wayne, and when he does, he's a bit of a really angry Bruce Wayne, and I think the reason behind that has something to do with the fact that this is set in the future. Doesn't matter, it's irrelevant. Let's move on. Now, it often feels to me that if Zack Snyder directed something like Mad Max Fury Road, he would make an absolutely incredible film. It's a very simplistic story. A car goes from A to B, and then from B to A. Very simple stuff. He would smash it out the park. Now, I've got to give it to Snyder. He's a very, very determined filmmaker, very, very determined person, and you can see why he's been so successful. His can-do attitude is exemplary. His application to work is fantastic. His work ethic is tremendous. You can see why he's so successful. But this is also one of his negatives, because I often feel that at times he's always trying to prove to the world how great a storyteller he is. He's almost trying to show his critics that he can make wonderfully, brilliantly intricate stories, and he doesn't really need to do that. But I do admire him for trying, because, you know, we're all here to aspire, right? But for me, what he really should be doing is leaning into the things he has in his toolkit. He should be coming up with simpler ideas. He should be working on simpler scripts. He should be looking at simpler scripts and turning those into films where he can do something quite tremendous. Now, he took a bit of a break after working on Justice League. You know, he had a personal family tragedy, which is very saddening. You know, his version of Justice League is much better than Joss Whedon's. However, it's still not a perfect film. It's too long, far too long. The story is not cohesive, meanders off into places it doesn't need to. There's too many slow-mo shots. It's not perfect, is what I'm saying. But what he did during the hiatus he had after being kind of sacked from Justice League was made a very cool short film, which is very simple in tone, very simple in narrative. If you get a chance, give it a little watch. However, again, I have to give it to him. He's extremely determined, he has wonderful work ethic, and the fact that he's trying to prove people wrong isn't a bad thing. I think if you push yourself as an individual, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, with the release of his latest film, Rebel Moon, just around the corner, which is also penned by Zack Snyder, based on an idea that was by Zack Snyder. I'm not going to lie, it's a bit worrying that that is the case. But the film stars the wonderfully underrated Sofia Boutella. If you've not seen the film Climax, which also stars Sofia, then please watch it. Now, strangely enough, it's also directed by another director who's always being criticized for having style over substance. He's an Argentinian director called Gaspar Noé, and he is absolutely fantastic. Do watch this film, Climax. It's wonderful. It's like acid for your eyes. You cannot take your eyes off of it. The narrative is batshit crazy. The dance sequences are amazing. The acting is first rate, considering most of the cast were taken off the streets of Paris. And just give it a watch. It is fantastic. It's a labyrinth of drugs, dance, and debauchery. What more could you ask for? Now, for me, Rebel Moon threatens to have the same issues that films like Sucker Punch and The Army of the Dead have. They are written by Zack Snyder. They're going to have very, very overly complicated narratives. They're going to have style. They're going to have wonderful action, but they're going to have an average story with brilliant visuals. So, is Zack Snyder a good director? Absolutely. I would say he's not just a good director, he's an absolutely wonderful visual director. The only issue is, for me, directing is not just visuals. In fact, I would say on the list of things you need to be a good director, having a wonderful sense of composition and having a wonderful visual eye are not at the top of that list. Whilst it is important, I wouldn't say it's anywhere near the top. I would say the most important thing, or at least one of the most important things you need as a director, is interpretation of text. The ability to tell a story. Because if you're a truly great director, you can recognize if a script is bad, good, average, if it needs work, if you should maybe stay away from it, if you need to change it, or if you can interpret it on screen using a lack of visuals, or if you can use more visuals to enhance the bad points of the screenplay. Now, a great example of this is the Swedish director Ruben Östlund, who directed Triangle of Sadness and Force Majeure. In most cases, Östlund will just put the camera down into a wonderful, wide composition of the scene and let the scene play out, sometimes not even showing the actors on screen. Now, that comes from a conscious choice. He understands the text, he understands how to make the text better, he understands what he needs to put on screen to get the story across. It adds so much richness to the whole text. But Östlund and Snyder are two different animals altogether. They work on different spectrums. Snyder really thrives with big budgets, big set pieces. His characters are almost godlike in their approach, whereas Östlund is a director with completely different sensibilities. Now let's get it straight. Snyder is a master of his craft. He's absolutely unique in his approach. Me personally, I'm looking forward to watching Rebel Moon. I can't wait to see what Zack Snyder's going to do next. I want to see if he can improve upon his storytelling skills. I want to see what visuals he comes up with next. And you know what? I might even put on 300 after making this video. Now, if you enjoyed this video, I would love if you would subscribe by clicking on here and watch this video here. See you soon.